In 2022, we horror fans ate well. There were breakout movies that will surely be classics, franchises that continued or ended, and some disappointments. We'll get to that. Personally, I watched far more fresh movies than I have before, so I'm feeling rather accomplished.
Are you delusional?
In total, I watched 20 films. Now that doesn't even amount to half of the horror movies that were released last year, but I'm still taking the W. So in this video, I will be going over each of those movies and ranking them from the absolute worst to the best that stuck with me. We'll be starting off with a movie that I put dead fucking last, and it stayed there the whole year. If you've been watching any of the streams that I participated in this last year, then you already have a fantastic idea of this first piece of shit. And that is Dashcam. Taking place during the Panorama, an internet personality travels to London to visit her friend. While there, her choices lead her to being right in the middle of a mysterious and disconcerting situation that she's vastly unprepared for. I'm going to reiterate some of the reasons and points that I've already made. First off, I quite enjoyed Rob Savage's previous horror film, Host, so I was hopeful going into Dashcam. It's first-person, found footage style, and that's about all that ties it to Host. Annie Hardy is a truly insufferable and disgusting character. Not only that, but the actress portraying her doesn't even seem to be doing that much acting, in that she's actually like this in real life. Yes, I checked. Unfortunately, it's damn near impossible to get past her and focus on the plot. I imagine that this would be a fine horror film if she wasn't the way she is. There are a lot of twists and turns. I mean that in a literal and story sense. I just kept waiting for the moment Annie would be killed. I checked how much time was left multiple times. Plus, we're given her freestyle rapping as part of the credits.
Oh, fuck yeah, this is the shit! Kill me now!
In 19th place, we have a movie I didn't hear much about, but decided to check out of sheer curiosity, and that is The Seed. A group of influencers decide to spend the weekend in the remote Mojave Desert during a history-making meteor shower. During the event, something plummets to Earth and begins consuming the lives of these women. I already knew this was about some sort of alien going into it, and while it does deliver on that, the movie just feels kind of boring. The humor of it didn't quite hit for me, and the characters weren't terribly engaging. The effects are pretty good and the location is cool, but it doesn't really do anything new. There were moments that were very trippy, but that's about all I remember about it. Overall, a meh film in my book. In the 18th spot, we have another kind of disappointing film, though I still give it props for using what it had, and almost hitting good marks for my taste. And that is Revealer. After literal hell breaks loose, a stripper and a religious protester have to work together to survive the apocalypse that's been unleashed around them. The movie is set in the 80s, it's drenched in neon, and has what sounds like a pretty interesting premise. So why is it so low on my list? It lacks attention-grabbing moments throughout, and some good tension. I like the idea and the style, it just dropped the ball. There's a scene where Angie is dancing and Dark All Day by Gunship is used. That was fantastic. Just from that alone, I thought I was really going to enjoy the rest of this film. That's a point in its favor though, is that the soundtrack is really good. It's just unfortunate that the other elements didn't meld. Just like I said in my review, if you love cheesy 80s horror, then I'm sure you'll still enjoy this. In 17th place, we have a movie that created quite a divided reaction amongst audiences, both when it was announced and released. Some thought it would be the greatest homage ever, and others saw disaster coming like a freight train. Unfortunately, the latter was closer to the end result. The Munsters. Serving as a prequel to the beloved black and white television series, this shows us what the undead lives of Lily, Grandpa, and Herman were like, as well as how Lily and Herman came to be a couple, and moved to Mockingbird Lane. I was initially one of the people who had tentative hope that this would turn out to be a good film. Rob Zombie is a fan of the Munsters, and so am I. So why the fuck? Needless to say, Mr. Zombie couldn't quite translate what makes the Munsters through his cinematic lens. I'll give you a hint as to what a good first step would have been. Don't get me wrong, I have absolutely nothing against this woman, but she is not Yvonne DiCarlo, and thus should not be trying to emulate her. However, Daniel Roebuck was probably the best part of this whole thing. You want to talk about a movie I should have been in? You want to talk about a movie that could have been both better and worse? In the 16th spot, we have They/Them. A group of young adults arrive at something of a conversion camp for the LGBTQ community. Aside from the disturbing nature one might expect from such a place, there seems to be a masked killer on the loose. This was a movie I was very on the fence about, because it could have gone either way in terms of extremes. Either it was going to be the most offensive shit for people like me, or it was going to be so light and easy to digest that it was barely recognizable as an LGBTQ+ horror film. But somehow it managed to plant itself firmly in the middle, leaning a bit on the latter side of things. I really wish that this had gone harder and farther. It just turned out way too PC. It feels like no one wanted to offend the normie crowd or the LGBTQ+ crowd. It could have been and done a lot more. At the same time, it wasn't an atrocious piece of garbage, and hopefully serves as a tentative step forward for us. Nearly 3 decades after the release of a beloved Halloween Disney classic, we got a sequel. But did it reach the same heights as the original? At number 15, we have Hocus Pocus 2. The Sanderson sisters have returned from the dead yet again, and seek vengeance on those who wronged them as well as the entire town of Salem. This leaves 3 high schoolers to find a way to stop them before it's too late. Hocus Pocus 2 was a film that a number of us had been waiting for years. There had been rumors and whispers for a while, but when it was confirmed that there would indeed be a sequel, I was hesitant. Hocus Pocus had been a staple of Halloween for me for a majority of my life. It's a symbol of my childhood, so much like the Munsters, I was highly unsure, but tentatively optimistic. If nothing else, I'm extremely glad that Kathy Najimy, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Bette Midler, as well as Doug Jones, returned to their roles. If they hadn't, this whole movie would not have worked in the slightest. With that being said, I really don't feel like this came close to touching what Hocus Pocus created. It lacked the colorful cinematography, the fun chaos, the mix of ridiculousness and genuinely terrifying elements, and even the gorgeous scoring. We got 2 cover songs from the Sanderson sisters, and while The Witches Are Back felt kind of out of place, I did enjoy one way or another. Hocus Pocus 2 is a fine film. It just missed the mark, and wasn't able to capture the magic of the first again. In 14th place, I put a film that I don't think was talked about much this last year, and that is The Cursed. Taking place in the early 1900s, a Roma clan is slaughtered, which results in nightmares plaguing residents of the land. When a strange artifact is finally unearthed, so too is the curse attached to it. I had some vague, preconceived notions of what to expect from this movie, and it actually subverted that. It's a gritty period piece with lots of blood and gore. The primary creature is unique. The CGI is a little The story is interesting. It could easily be classified as a slow burn. It reminded me a bit of the style of Hammer horror films as well. It just turned out to be not quite my taste in horror at all. In 13th place is a movie I heard made a lot of people mad, and it didn't even involve a guy in a mask, and that is Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. A group of young adults spend a hurricane in a remote mansion where they proceed to party. During one game, things take a turn and bodies begin to pile up. I was expecting, judging by what I had heard up to that point, to be annoyed going into this film, but by the end I really couldn't say I was. I can see why some would find the characters grating though. If nothing else, I was a bit concerned with being unsatisfied by the ending. The characters weren't terribly deep to me. A few stood out. The makeup effects did a good job. You don't get anything amazing though, but they're decent. It feels like it would be comfortable in the murder mystery category, but definitely not as enjoyable as Clue. In 12th place, we have another Shudder exclusive, this time for the holidays, and that is Christmas Bloody Christmas. It's Christmas Eve night, and while everyone is closing up and returning home, the year's newest toy, a robot Santa, is coming to life to kill everyone in its path. I saw a number of people refer to this as a combination of slasher Santa movies and Terminator, and I can definitely see that, especially towards the end. This is another one that will make blood and gore fans pretty happy. The Robo-Santa himself is literally just a guy trying to move like he isn't human, so it's got those B-horror vibes. However, near the end where we get the more robotic skeleton look from him, it's actually unsettling. At least to me. Overall, however, it gave me watered-down Rob Zombie vibes. It's ridiculous, but no less of a fun ride for those who like to have a few drinks and enjoy the holidays. In 11th place is the last film I watched in 2022. It's one that a number of people were talking about, and was said to be one of the most disturbing films of the year, and that is Smile. After witnessing a horrible accident, a psychologist begins to experience unnerving and strange occurrences. It's possible that she has to confront the darkness in her own past, otherwise she will meet the same fate. Well, they really weren't lying when they said this was unsettling, were they? I would even go so far as to say, if you haven't seen this yet, and you're not in a good place mentally, don't. I did pick up on similar vibes as It Follows, maybe even The Ring or The Grudge. It's a very solemn and dread-filled film. It's definitely creepy and got a couple jump scares out of me. The after effect of it, if you will, reminded me of the Haunting series as well, so if that gives you any idea. The creature itself is terrifying looking, especially when you get to see it fully. A solid horror movie, well made, well acted, it's just not quite my taste in horror. At number 10, I put a movie that may not be full-on horror, but certainly dips a foot into the genre, and that is Don't Worry Darling. A woman living in a picture-perfect 50s neighborhood with her husband begins to notice some truly odd things. Each leads her closer and closer to revealing the truth about the company that claims to be protecting the residents. Right off the bat, I got heavy Stepford Wives vibes, and while watching it, I was pretty much right. It's got the same basic idea as Stepford Wives, but does take some different twists. I will admit that I didn't see the final big twist coming, and that was probably because I was assuming it was going to go the same route as Stepford Wives. It's a bit messy and likely leaves some plot holes, but it's still a compelling story with interesting characters. There's a good bit of tension and mindfuckery. In 9th place, we have one of the most talked about horror films. The film that took many people by surprise, and really dialed the WTF factor up to 11, and that's Barbarian. A woman arrives at the Airbnb she booked to find someone else staying there. The situation gets weirder and weirder. There is a secret passage in the basement of this place, and that's not even the worst part. I was told to go into this blind, and I did so to the best of my ability. I understand why now, because at a few different points you feel like you know what the deal is, and where this is going to go, but the movie just grabs you by the shirt and says, no bitch. There's plenty of fabulous acting, the effects are quite good, and the story is jarring at times. I really did not know what to expect after the passageway is discovered, and I'm still trying to figure out how this film managed to make me feel a smidge of empathy and sadness at the end. At number 8, we have the movie that I'm sure you've all been waiting for me to discuss. The finale of a decades-long franchise that several horror channels would not shut up about. Halloween Ends. Taking place 4 years after the events of Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, Laurie and Allison are attempting to move on with their lives, but, as always, Michael Myers is lurking just beneath the surface. This time, he finds a new way to spread evil throughout Haddonfield. You want to talk about a divisive movie, darling? You want to talk about either sheer hate-filled disappointment or heel-planting defense with no in-between? I will state once again that when it comes to the Halloween franchise, I am painfully neutral. I like H2O, Season of the Witch, Halloween 2, not the Rob Zombie kind. It's not difficult to see why die-hard fans would be upset with this. What is supposed to be the definitive conclusion to their beloved franchise. This Halloween trilogy felt kinda janky to me throughout, and Ends is no different. The concept that they tried to give us of the evil of Michael Myers being passed on is interesting. I actually like that idea. The character of Corey is interesting. I'm not saying it makes a whole lot of sense, but he's interesting. Taking a step back from that, this movie was advertised as the final, all-out fight between Laurie and Michael, right? That was a huge reason why so many people had such high hopes for this film. But what we got was just Grandma and Grandpa are fighting again. Like I said, I like where they were trying to go with this. Probably not the best idea for the end to Halloween, though. In 7th place, we have a rarity in horror. A sequel that came out the same year as the original, and did just as good as the first. And that is Pearl. Serving as the prequel to X, we get a look into Pearl's life on her family's farm, and her dreams of becoming a famous dancer in order to leave. There are several things standing in her way, and her response to them is violent. This feels like if a Judy Garland movie went off the fucking rails, and Dorothy started slaughtering bitches. It's beautifully shot and excellently acted. I believe that if X paved the way for Mia Goth to be a scream queen, Pearl solidified that. This ties in great with X and manages to stand out from it too. It has good tension and kills that look fantastic. It's utterly unhinged and a wild ride. At number 6, we have a horror movie made by fans for fans, with plenty of rock thrown in, and that's Studio 666. The Foo Fighters are working on their pivotal 10th album, and to make it even better, they record it in a mansion drenched in tragic rock and roll history. It isn't long before a demonic force is unleashed on the band. I have been a fan of the Foo Fighters for years, so I was thrilled to hear they would be making their own horror movie. I knew it was going to be fun and have plenty of rock and roll, and I was right. This is one of those movies that's self-aware. It knows how ridiculous it is and leans into it. It may not be to everyone's taste, but I had fun with it. It should please gorehounds and people who like unique special effects. There are a number of winks and nods to horror fans sprinkled throughout. Another reason why this film holds a special place for me personally is because I watched it for the first time the day before Taylor Hawkins passed away. So I'm extremely saddened by his passing, but at the very least, I'm glad that he could make this film with the band. In 5th place, I put a film that is rather impressive and interesting for what happens on screen and behind the scenes, and that is Hellbender. A mother and daughter living in a secluded home seem to be living a simple and pleasant life. However, upon meeting other teens, the daughter uncovers a deadly secret passed down from generation to generation. The main reason I saw this movie is because of Joe Bob Briggs presenting it. Like I said, it's impressive because it's a low-budget film, made by a family during the pandemic. There are some deep themes explored, especially the relationship between a mother and daughter. It doesn't follow the same path as we've seen in a bunch of other horror movies. It has its own style of storytelling, and it falls into the witch category, so of course I would enjoy it. At number 4, we have the latest in horror from Jordan Peele, and that is Nope. A secluded gulch experiences some extremely bizarre occurrences over a series of nights that leave residents baffled and searching the skies. Well, this is a movie that lives up to its title. I knew that this would have something to do with aliens when I watched it, but some of the twists and turns it took did throw me off. Not necessarily in a bad way. Sci-fi isn't usually my subgenre of choice when it comes to horror, but this movie kept me engaged. It's beautifully shot and the special effects are stunning, especially when it comes to the alien in question, which, by the way, is fucking terrifying. Once it's revealed exactly what it does and what happens to you when it catches you, horrific. On a similar note, the sound design actually gave me goosebumps. Not in a good way. In the 3rd spot, we have a Hulu exclusive that showed us Sebastian Stan can be utterly insane, and that is Fresh. A woman frustrated with the modern dating scene meets a charming man. They begin a lovely relationship that holds promises of a good future, but there's something about this new potential boyfriend that she doesn't know about. Yet. Fresh surprised me a bit. I knew it was about cannibalism and Sebastian Stan was in it, but that's about it. I think it captures what it's like for a majority of us in this current dating scene, and that's before the cannibal is introduced. I quite liked the performances of Stan and Daisy Edgar Jones. None of the characters got on my nerves or were completely incompetent. And who doesn't enjoy a good shit stain of a man gets his comeuppance story? At number 2, we have the slasher homage that practically everybody has been talking about since its release, and that is X. A group of adult entertainment filmmakers arrive at a farm in rural Texas in the late 70s, with the intention of filming their best project ever. But once the elderly couple who own the property discover what they're up to, the group has to figure out how to escape with their lives. As many others have already said, I rather enjoyed this one. I was thrown off by it initially, but the more I watched it and watched others watch it, the more I liked it. I liked the nods to other classic horror like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The characters were easy to like and enjoy. There were twists to it that didn't break your neck trying to follow. It's a smart film that I'm comfortable in saying will become a classic in its own right over time. Before I talk about my number 1 spot and favorite horror film of 2022, I want to know what horror movies you guys watched. While you're at it, why don't you tell me which horror movie you loved and which one you hated? Alright, so if X is my second favorite, which horror movie holds the esteemed privilege of being the best in my opinion, of the year. That would be another horror movie set in the 70s, ironically enough. The Black Phone. There is a masked kidnapper and murderer on the loose in North Denver. Missing posters for young boys litter the neighborhood, and more are added nearly every week. When Finney becomes the latest victim of the grabber, he receives some unexpected help from past victims. This one piqued my interest right away. I was lucky enough to miss the trailers, reactions, and practically every detail about it, aside from Ethan Hawke and Joe Hill's names being attached. So when I first watched this film, I was going in damn near 100% blind. Aside from the attention-grabbing story, very well-developed characters, and fantastic acting, I love the score and the vibe. It genuinely feels like it was filmed in the 70s. Much like X. It will also continue to hold a special place for me because I grew up in Colorado, as did my parents, and they grew up during the 70s. So this movie somehow manages to capture a nostalgic feel and mix in tons of eeriness and heart. The movie hadn't even reached its climax before I knew it would be a favorite of mine. So those were the 20 horror movies from 2022 that I watched in 2022. It was a pretty damn good year for horror, and so far, it's looking like 2023 could be similar. There are quite a few horror movies that I'm curious to see, and explore on the channel with you guys. What are some horror movies that are set to be released this year that you're looking forward to? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. See you later.